This is Ryan Kurlinski. I'm a manager within the ISO's Department of Market Monitoring, or the Independent Market Monitor for the CAISO balancing area and the WEIM. So today I'll be going over some highlights from our recently published Q1 2024 report on market issues and performance. So I'll be stopping for questions throughout. Let's see, it is kind of tricky to field questions from the chat. I'm trying to work through what I'm going to say during these presentations. So please try to keep all questions to verbal questions. And then let's see. So I'm presenting this today. This report, along with most DMM reports here. This report's the product of everybody in the Department of Market Monitoring. I think there's 17 of us now, and I'm just the person that gets to present it. So with that, we'll go ahead to our first slide. Okay, so this graph shows the average monthly natural gas prices at natural gas hubs, major natural gas hubs around the West, as well as the Henry Hub price, which serves as a national reference point for natural gas prices. And it's showing the monthly gas prices here going back 4 years. We can see that in Q1 of 2024. I was thinking, hey Marvin, can you see my pointer on this? I'm guessing I have to click on it.
Yeah, currently not able to see your pointer.
Okay, if I do that, you can.
There we go. Yes, perfect.
All right. So looking at Q1 2024. We can see that there was a slight increase in gas prices in January 2024 compared to December of 2023. But gas prices were significantly lower in January 2024 than they were in January of 2023. And then even more importantly here, we see the gas prices dipping significantly in February and March of 2024. So that, I mean, and actually gas prices around the West, in these major hubs around the West, we see here in February and March 2024, actually got down to levels that we haven't really seen being that low since the beginning of COVID there, right in April of 2020. So very low natural gas prices in the major hubs around the West. So the SoCal Citygate natural gas price was down on average over the 3 months in Q1 2024 was down 71% from Q1 2023. Similarly, the PG&E Citygate natural gas price in the first quarter of 2024 was down 64% compared to the same quarter in 2023. And El Paso Permian was also down 64%, and Northwest Sumas up in the Northwest, that gas price was down 62% in the first quarter of 2024 compared to 2023. And you know, this was one of the major stories of Q1 2024. Very low gas prices overall throughout the quarter, contributing to low electricity prices on average, especially compared to the same quarter of the year before. Of course, the other major story for the wholesale electricity markets in the first quarter of 2024 were the severe cold weather event up in the Northwest. That drove, you know, there was the average temperatures up in the Pacific Northwest and Intermountain West areas were significantly below average temperatures. And this drove very high electricity prices up in those areas. So this chart, we are looking at monthly average peak day ahead bilateral market prices at the Mid Columbia hub there in the blue, and then the Palo Verde hub in yellow. And then we're also looking at in the dotted lines the average monthly day ahead peak hour electricity prices at the two of the major load nodes in the ISO's day ahead markets, Pacific Gas and Electric and Southern California Edison. So what we're seeing here is the mid C prices in January were extremely high. They mid C bilateral prices, peak prices averaged $250 per megawatt hour in January due to that severe cold weather event up in the Northwest in the middle of the month. Palo Verde for January was average only $70. The CAISO day peak prices, if you do a load weighted average, the two averaged about $66 per megawatt hour in January. But comparing Q1 2024 prices, these day ahead prices, the bilateral and the CAISO prices to Q1 2023, we see that CAISO prices and Palo Verde prices in Q1 2024 were significantly lower than the prices for all three of those months in the first quarter of 2023. And the mid C prices also dropped significantly in February and March of 2024 relative to what they were in February and March of 2023. And so maybe one of the stories I'm going to get to is that in these first maybe half of the slides here is that so despite this cold weather event having resulting in really high prices up in the Pacific Northwest and Intermountain West in January, due to those low natural gas prices that I just talked about in the previous slide, on averaging over the first quarter of 2024, wholesale electricity market prices were down across the WEIM, CAISO, and even in the Pacific Northwest compared to the first quarter of 2023. But we'll talk more about that as we go through some of these slides. So this graph shows similar information as the previous slide, but here we're looking at the peak bilateral prices at mid C and Palo Verde. The colors switched on this, sorry about that. But these are the daily prices for the peak product for mid C and Palo Verde electricity prices. And so we see here that that I think, as most people recall, the really high average mid C prices in January were driven largely by extremely high prices during the severe cold weather event in the middle of January. But we do see from this yellow line, the daily mid C prices, that those high prices at mid C did continue relative to Palo Verde and the CAISO load weighted average day ahead peak energy prices. Those higher mid C prices did continue throughout much of January, and then looking even over towards February and March. I know the scale here from the really high prices there, and January 13th prices in mid C got to $934 per megawatt hour. So the scale isn't, you can't really see quite as well in February and March, but the high prices at mid C compared to Palo Verde and the CAISO balancing area and the CAISO day ahead prices, those high prices at mid C did continue throughout most of the first quarter there. So we can kind of see the average prices in the table there. So for instance, for February, mid C prices were still over 50% higher than CAISO and Palo Verde prices on average. Mid C prices in March were more than double the average day ahead prices at CAISO and Palo Verde. So while it really stood out from the severe cold weather event in January, that mid C had much higher prices than the rest of the West. In January, it was kind of a story for the whole quarter there, that there was price separation. and higher prices up in the Northwest and Intermountain West compared to California and the desert Southwest. Let's see. So, you know what? Let's stop there for questions before we get on to the next. We're going to get on to how these price differences played out in the ISO markets. Let's see if there's any questions on this at this point.
Okay, and if you do have a question, you can feel free to enter the queue by using the raise hand icon. It should be located in the bottom right corner of the participants panel. Okay, and we're currently waiting for any incoming questions. Just going to check one more time here. Again, you can use the raise hand icon in the bottom right corner of the participants panel. Please make sure you have that panel open using the person icon in the bottom right corner of WebEx. Okay, I'm seeing no questions at this time.
Okay, that actually works. It's good to jump into. So let's jump into how these price differences between Northwest, Intermountain West, then California and Desert Southwest materialized in the ISO's market. So here we're looking at the average 15-minute market locational marginal prices, just from a subset of days there, the kind of the tightest days up in the Northwest, January 13th to 15th. The dark line shows the 15-minute market LMP for each of the balancing areas in the WEIM over these days. And we see that the average prices, average FMM prices, and this is average over all hours from the January 13th to 15th, was between $780 and $940 for most areas in the Pacific Northwest and Intermountain West, right? And that's compared to kind of prices in the $150 to $200 range for balancing areas in California and the desert Southwest. We see Idaho Power and PAC East were kind of in the middle there. Obviously, Idaho Power still had elevated prices up towards $500 on average over these 3 days. The bars show how the different components that contributed to the price differences between the balancing areas. So in less turbulent periods, for instance, the green bars show the contribution of the greenhouse gas component of pricing. Tends to drive down prices in balancing areas outside of California relative to areas inside California. But over these 3 days and much of the first quarter, we see that the price separation between California and Desert Southwest, right, at kind of lower price, at significantly lower prices than areas in Desert Southwest and Intermountain West, were driven by a couple other components of congestion. So first, the red bars shows congestion from WEIM transfer constraints. So the WEIM transfer constraints were, on these 3 days in particular, but also throughout much of the first quarter, were binding, right? Meaning that they were at their limits. And we see that these red bars here, the congestion on the WEIM transfer constraints contributed on average to pushing up prices up in the Northwest, Intermountain West by about $350 to $450 above balancing areas in California and Desert Southwest, so the red bars. And the yellow bars show the contribution to price separation from transmission constraints within the California ISO balancing area. And this was over this period, this is mainly the COI nomogram. So we see that congestion on right, flow-based transmission constraints in the CAISO balancing area contributed to pushing down prices in California and the desert Southwest, and then relative to balancing areas in the Pacific Northwest, Intermountain West. So the contribution from those transmission constraints within the CAISO balancing area to the price separation was about $200 to $300 of the price difference between these areas in the 15-minute market. So let's go on here now to this. The slide's a little tricky. So and if people saw our public board memo for September, but we are working on putting together some more graphs to more easily look at kind of differences between regional prices over periods of time. But for this report and the Q2 one, this is what we're going to currently go with. So this graph shows monthly average 15-minute market prices for the last 2 years for each balancing area, and it's a heat map. So for each month shows a different shows the kind of the colors show the relative size of the locational marginal price relative to the system marginal energy cost. So for instance, January of 2024, we see that, which is obviously the main month of the pivotal month here in Q1 of 2024, we see significantly higher prices in the Pacific Northwest and most of the Intermountain West relative to the California and the Desert Southwest. And these prices are averaged over the month. And so what we're seeing here is that, from in the last slide we saw that the driver of those kind of the high prices in the Pacific Northwest really was congestion, right? So there was not sufficient transmission available to get all the cheaper power from California and the Desert Southwest up to the Pacific Northwest, Intermountain West. We see that this is showing, looking at January 2024, this is showing that was the case for kind of all of on average, right, Q1 of 2024. That it was kind of congestion contributing to driving the high prices in the Pacific Northwest, Intermountain West. Now let's compare that to January of 2023, when gas prices across the West, as we talked about in the first slide, were significantly higher, right, than gas prices in the Q1 of 2024, right? So in January of 2023 here, we're seeing high prices, high average monthly FMM prices that across the board here in the WAM balancing areas, right? So notice like the heat map doesn't show for January 2023, right, a significant large price differences between the balancing areas like it does for January 2024. So we noticed here though is that as in the Q1 of 2024, after we get past the severe cold weather event up in the Pacific Northwest in kind of mid and into late January, prices significantly drop, right, across that WAM, especially up in the Pacific Northwest, Intermountain West. So prices come down significantly for February and March 2024. Although we do continue to see, like I talked about earlier, we do continue to see congestion, and it's hard to see in the heat map here, but there is still congestion here if we're kind of comparing areas in Desert Southwest, right? Prices on average in February, say we're in the $20, $25, $27 range. And then Southern California, say SCE is $31. So there's still congestion and price separation from areas in the south to areas in the north, PG&E and areas in the Pacific Northwest. So that, like we talked about that from looking at the bilateral price slide, that there was still price separation on average in February and March, even after that cold weather event. But on average though, so what on average though for the Q1 of 2024, prices were significantly lower than average prices in Q1 of 2023. And taking a simple average of the 15-minute market prices across balancing areas in the Pacific Northwest, Intermountain West, right, for Q1 2024. Even with the severe cold weather event, high prices in January, prices in the Pacific Northwest and Intermountain West were about 20% lower in Q1 2024 on average compared to Q1 2023. And average prices in both the CAISO balancing area and in the Desert Southwest, both of those average prices in both those areas were more than 50% less in Q1 2024 compared to Q1 2023. So, I think kind of the takeaway, two of the main stories here for Q1 2024 is the high, you get the high severe cold weather event over the Pacific Northwest driving high prices in January compared to the rest of the WIM, but that's mainly driven by congestion. But the overall story when averaging out prices across all the areas and within each kind of region as well, we're seeing that due to the really low natural gas prices in Q1 2024, that wholesale electricity prices overall averaged over Q1 2024 were significantly lower than Q1 2023, despite that that cold weather event in January. Okay. So congestion then, right? So I think one of the major stories and impacts to the market from this the January cold weather event was congestion related, as you talked about, right? That was kind of the driver of the price separation in January. So this slide shows a few things. So it's showing the congestion rent on intertie constraints. So showing the congestion rent actually on intertie constraints for the balancing areas participate in the day-ahead market. Currently, it's just the CAISO balancing area, and it's showing two different things. First is showing the congestion rent, the left-hand side for each quarter, it's showing the congestion rent for each intertie, but then it also shows the direction, whether or not the congestion rent was import congestion, or congestion rent on import in the direction into the CAISO balancing area, which is white, or whether the congestion rent was in the export direction out of the CAISO balancing area, which is in gray. So I guess a quick refresher. So right, the simple way of thinking about congestion rent in the day-ahead market is if you get congestion rent if the money that's paid out to generation at a point on one side of the constraint is less than the money that's paid by load into the market on the other side of the constraint. So historically, we've seen in the CAISO balancing area, congestion rent has been in the import direction over interties. You kind of see that here in most of the quarters here in 2023, right? Most of the congestion rent on interties, most of the congestion rent on the interties is white, right? So it's an import direction. But what we saw, so when we did the Q4 report, it was interesting was that we did kind of point out that it seemed at the time like a very significant shift from the congestion rate going from import congestion rate, the white, to export congestion. So notice, right, for Q4 2023, the export congestion was, it became more than, significantly more than half of the overall intertie congestion rent in CAISO. But obviously, this was in Q1 2024, what we're seeing is just a huge spike in the amount of export congestion rent over the CAISO balancing area intertie constraints. Right, in 2023, no quarter had more than about $18 million of combined import and export congestion rent. In Q1 2024, intertie congestion rent, exploded to $132 million. $130 million of that was in the export direction, and most of that was on, we're seeing here in blue here, was on the Malin intertie. And that was, a lot of that was in January. Just for just for context, the congestion rent on internal constraints within the CAISO balancing area in the day-ahead market in Q1 2024 decreased down to $125 million. That was down from $265 million in the first quarter of 2023. So yeah, I think this is again one of the most, I guess, interesting and major stories from Q1 2024 is just the large amount of export congestion rent from the California ISO balancing area in the day market up to Malin, up to the Pacific Northwest. Okay, from there now let's stop for questions before we get on to a slightly different topic.
Okay, once again, you can enter the question queue by using the raise hand icon that will be located on the bottom right corner of the participants panel. If you don't have the participants panel open, just make sure to click the person icon in the lower right hand corner of WebEx. Okay, we're currently awaiting any incoming questions. Again, just use that raise hand icon in the lower right hand corner of the participants panel. All right. I did note someone asked if the slides would be distributed after the call.
Yes, we will be posting these publicly. You should be able to get them from the Department of Market Monitoring's website.
And that is the only question that I see at the moment.
All right, thanks. I will keep on going then. All right, so it's related to congestion rent. So this graph shows that the California ISO currently runs an auction to auction off congestion revenue rights, whereby, and in this auction, entities can offer to pay to buy the rights to day-ahead market congestion rents, and that's what the green bar shows. The green bar shows payments out to entities who have purchased rights to congestion rents in the day-ahead market, and that's right. This is the payouts directly from the day-ahead market congestion rents, but they have to then pay in. They have to buy them in the auction. So the blue bars show the auction revenues that are received by transmission ratepayers in the congestion revenue rights auction. Notice here that for I think every quarter over these last few years, the blue bars, which is the auction revenue received by transmission ratepayers in the CRR auction, is significantly less than the green bar, which is the obligation for transmission ratepayers to pay out to the people who purchase those CRRs in auction based on the day-ahead market prices and the day-ahead market congestion rent. In the first quarter of 2024, transmission ratepayers lost about $53 million from auction CRRs. This is up from $30 million in Q1 of 2023. Worth continuing to note that in 2019, reforms to the congestion revenue rights auction were passed to limit the payouts. That's the green bar, right? To limit the payouts to auctioned CRRs to only the congestion rents only the congestion rents from the actual size of the limits of each constraint that actually exists in the day-ahead market, right? And that can help to limit these potential losses if in the auction model the model runs with an estimate of what the transmission limits were going to be that may be significantly higher than what the actual transmission limit of the line is in the day-ahead market. And so those track 1B revenue deficiency offset reforms limited the payouts to these auction CRRs to only be the amount for each constraint equal to the limit of the constraint that actually exists in the day-ahead market. And this has helped to significantly reduce losses to ratepayers from the CRR auction design. And we estimate that DMEM has estimated that these track 1B revenue deficiency offsets reduce the payments to non-load serving entities auctioned, that the ones that bought auction CRRs reduced the payments to them by about $32 million in the first quarter of 2024. All right, so these next two slides, I'm going to talk about real-time imbalance offset costs. This slide, I'll talk about it in the CAISO balancing area, and the next slide, I'm going to talk about real-time imbalance offset costs in WEIM balancing areas, because there's these pretty different dynamic in terms of the congestion component of these real-time imbalance offset costs. So we see here that the real-time imbalance offset costs in the CAISO area were $51 million in Q1 of 2024, down from $90 million in Q1 in 2023. you can see in the bars show how the real-time balance offset cost is broken down by component. Blue is the energy portion of those imbalance offset costs. Green is the congestion portion of the balance offset costs. For both CAISO and we'll talk about next slide, WEIM, our analysis indicates that the primary driver of these uplift costs for the energy component, that's the blue bar, and again for Q1 2024, the energy component of the uplift was $8 million. But we've written a paper about this. You can get to in DMM's website that the primary driver of the energy portion of these uplift costs is that load pays or gets paid a different real-time price than generation pays or gets paid in real time. Right, so generation in real time, say in the 15-minute market, settles on the difference between the that generator's day-ahead market price and its 15-minute market price, right, times the change in its schedule between the day-ahead market and the 15-minute market. And then similarly, that generator's also settles on the difference between the 15-minute market price and the 5-minute market price. Load instead settles on an average price, a price that's an average between the 15-minute market price and the 5-minute market price. And so that can result, it often does result in essentially load settling on a different price in real time than generation settles on. And so if load ends up, as we've seen used oftentimes in the CAISO market, load will end up paying in less into the real-time market for its differences between day-ahead and real-time load, less than generators get paid out. And so this has to be made up by an uplift charge, which goes to measure demand. So that dynamic is similar between WEIM and CAISO. The congestion component is, I think, again, sticking with the theme here in Q1, that congestion was a major story in Q1 2024. The dynamic for the congestion component of this uplift offset is a little bit different, right? So to get in the CAISO market historically, what we've seen is the congestion component of this imbalance offset, the green bars, is a charge. It's an uplift to load, which means that less money's been paid into the market than has been paid out for congestion costs. And the way that materializes usually is if the day-ahead market has a certain limit for a constraint, and the real-time market runs with a lower limit than the day-ahead market had for that constraint. In that situation, then day-ahead schedules have purchased flows over the limit in the day-ahead market, but then with a lower limit in real time, the entities who purchase the day-ahead flows sell those flows those flows back at the, say, 50-minute market constraint shadow price, and there is not a counterparty. So lower limits in the real time than the day-ahead market will create an uplift cost, which has to be allocated out to measure demand. Jump to this graph now shows real-time balance offset costs in non-CAISO WEIM areas. And what I want to pay attention to here is the dark green bars in Q1 2024 in the negative direction. So what this is showing is that the congestion component of the real-time imbalance offset, just the offset, let's say it can be either charge or credit, but it's generally been a credit for non-CAISO WEIM balancing areas. And that's because most of this credit is due to congestion rent accrued in the real-time market on WEIM transfer constraints, right? So again, the settlement for all schedules in, say, the FMM is it's based on the incremental schedules relative to day ahead, and in WEIM it's incremental schedules relative to base schedules. So WEIM transfer constraints have a higher limit, right, in the 15-minute market than the base schedules across transfer constraints. And so in real time, first off, in the 15-minute market, when transfers flow over WM transfer constraints up to limits in excess of the base schedules, then that results in congestion rent on these WAM transfer constraints. So what we saw in Q1 2024 was that the congestion rent that accrued, these dark green bars negative in the negative side here, the congestion rent was about an $87 million credit, again largely on WAM transfer constraints. The energy and loss portions of the real-time balance offset combined to be about a $6 million charge. That's on the positive side here. And then, so it's a significant difference here from Q1 2023. Q1 2023 overall, the real-time balance offset was a $10 million charge to WEM entities in Q1 2023. So this, the large amount of congestion that we saw flowing, from in the Southwest into California, and then especially California, other areas up into the Northwest and Pacific Northwest, Intermountain West, did result in a significant amount of transfer congestion rent on WM transfers, which ended up, being paid out to WEIM entities. So any questions on that? Let's stop with questions on that.
Okay, and as a reminder, if you do have a question, please make sure that you have the participants panel open by clicking the person icon in the lower right-hand corner of WebEx. Once you have that open, on the bottom right-hand corner of the participants panel, you'll see a raised hand icon, and you can hit that to indicate that you have a question. Okay, currently waiting for any incoming questions. And I'm seeing nothing at this time.
All right, I'll keep going. Okay, staying on the uplift theme, this graph shows bid cost recovery payments to both resources in the CAISO balancing area and resources in WEIM areas. Those bid cost recovery payments are broken down for the CAISO balancing area into day-ahead bid cost recovery. That's the blue. Bid cost recovery attributed to the residual unit commitment market in red, and then the green is the rest of the bid cost recovery from real time in the CAISO market. Yellow bars show the real-time bid cost recovery for non-CAISO WEIM balancing areas. What we see here is that for the California ISO, the blue, red, and green bars, bid cost recovery in Q1 2024 was down significantly, totaled about $41.5 million. It's down from $80.3 million in Q1 of 2023. And most of this decrease can be attributed to a decrease in the RUC, the residual unit commitment portion of bid cost recovery, the red bars. That was down $22.3 million in Q1 2024 compared to Q1 2023. The WEM balancing areas, again, the yellow bars, estimated bid cost recovery payments were also down significantly. Those were down to about $4.8 million in Q1 2024 compared to $13.1 million in Q1 of 2023. All right. So this chart is showing us the residual unit commitment, showing us the incremental residual unit commitment requirement or procurement. And that's incremental to the IFM schedules that physical generation received from the IFM, and it shows the black line shows the net incremental requirement in the residual unit commitment market compared to what came out of the IFM. And just a quick refresher, right? The residual unit commitment market, it runs after the IFM. And it's intended to ensure that the amount of physical supply that has must-offer obligations going into the real-time market is sufficient to meet the load and also potential uncertainty between what net load is expected to be when the data market ran versus what it might end up being in real time. And so there's various drivers of this graph shows in the different colored bars, different components of what determines a need for procuring physical generation in RUC, incremental to what the IFM schedules were for physical resources. So, for instance, the blue bars we're seeing in this graph, those show that's from if the load that cleared in the IFM is less than the day ahead load forecast, then more supply will need to be procured in the zero unit commitment market in order to have physical supply equal to the expected load forecast. And similarly, the green bars that shows that if there's net virtual supply in the IFM, that's obviously not physical supply, and so there will be additional residual unit commitment physical capacity required in order to have enough physical supply to meet the load forecast. We're focused on here are the red bars, though. These are the operator adjustments. It's probably better to call these the operator uncertainty adjustments. Those red bars are intended to they're adjustments to the RUC requirement, which starts off being the load forecast, adjustments to account for uncertainty in net load that may materialize between the net load forecast in the day-ahead market and what net load may end up being in the 15-minute market. And so starting off here in the middle of this graph, on June 30th, 2023, the ISO started using the Mosaic quantile regression method to estimate, to determine how much to adjust the RUC requirement for uncertainty. And the goal of the regression, starting on middle of 2023, was to try to procure enough capacity to meet 97.5% of any of uncertainty that might materialize in the net load forecast between the day-ahead market and the 15-minute market. And what we saw there was that from July through December 21st, 2023, a very significant increase in the operator uncertainty adjustments in the RUC market, as RUC was trying to procure enough capacity to cover 97.5% of uncertainty that might materialize. But then on December 21st, 2023, the ISO adjusted its Mosaic quantile regression method, and instead started looking at outside conditions to determine what percentile of the uncertainty that this RUC adjustment should try to cover. So instead of the Mosaic quantile regression trying to estimate what's the 97.5th percentile of uncertainty, they adjusted the regression to instead, based on outside system conditions, to try to estimate what's the 50th percentile of uncertainty, or what is the 75th percentile of uncertainty. And so they adjusted it to not always try to cover 97.5% of uncertainty that might materialize. What we're seeing from this then in Q1 2024 is that when the ISO switched to a condition-based approach for determining the percentile of uncertainty to cover with this Mosaic quantile regression, the amount of operator uncertainty adjustments went down significantly compared to the second half of 2023. But it was that. But because as ISO started using this Mosaic quantile regression method in the middle of 2023, right before Q1 2023, we do see that the amount of operator adjustments here, the red bars, was still up about 35% compared to Q1 of 2023. Yeah, and overall, the total RUC procured incremental IFM schedules, the gray line, it did end up being down 6% compared to Q1 2023. We'll talk about this change in December on the next slide. So this graph shows the average daily RUC adjustment, the operator uncertainty adjustment, from December 1st, 2023, all the way through March 31st, 2024. So you can see that when the ISO is using the Mosaic quantile regression to try to cover 97.5% of uncertainty, that the average RUC adjustment was significantly higher up through December 21st. Okay, so and sorry, the color coding here is DMM's estimate of based on its based on its looking at regression model results. DMM's estimate of whether or not on each of these days the Mosaic quantile regression was trying to cover 97.5% of uncertainty, which is the red bars, or whether it's trying to cover 75% of upward uncertainty, that's the yellow bars, or whether it's trying to cover just the 50th percentile of uncertainty, that's the green bars. So we see, but in Q1 of 2024, the ISO attempted to cover the 97.5th percentile of uncertainty in only one day, January 13th. Let's see, and so that resulted in an average upward adjustment of the day, average over the day of 2,400 megawatts. But over the course, from December 21st through March 31st, every other day the ISO only tried to cover the 75th percentile of uncertainty or the 50th percentile of uncertainty. Our analysis indicates that the Mosaic quantile regression is trying to cover the 75th percentile of uncertainty on 69% of these days. And on these days, the average upward adjustment was 1,200 megawatts. And the 50th percentile was instead used during 30% of days during this period, resulting in an adjustment of around 700 megawatts on average. And again, I just emphasize, I've said this a few times on some of these public calls, that the Mosaic quantile. So this switch to using a condition-based method to determine how much uncertainty the RUC adjustment should cover, was clearly an improvement in the RUC adjustment, right? Those trying to cover 97.5% of uncertainty was clearly too high for most days. So switching to a condition-based approach seemed to make the RUC adjustment more reasonable, but it does have implications for the EDAM design, the imbalance reserve up product demand curve that is currently designed to kind of target uncertainty covering try to cover 97.5% of uncertainty. And so I think what the ISO switching to this condition-based approach has shown that during most days, almost all days, especially when conditions are not tight, that there's not a need in the day-ahead market to procure extra capacity to cover 97.5% of uncertainty. So we just continue to stress that it will be important for the ISO to try to systematically, create a formula for what are these conditions, what are the conditions that it's looking at to determine which percentile of uncertainty to try to target in the day-ahead market, so that can be translated into a formula for the imbalance reserve up product demand curve. Any questions on that? Stop for questions.
If you do have a question,
okay,
please feel free to use the raise hand icon located at the bottom right corner of the participants panel to enter the question queue. Once again, make sure that your participants panel is open by clicking the person icon in the lower right hand corner of WebEx. Okay, I am not currently seeing any questions. We'll give it a few more seconds here. Okay, it looks as though we have no questions at this time.
Okay, I'll keep jamming then. So this slide is just a reminder of with the graphic on the slide, just a reminder of a action that the CAISO balancing area was taking from starting July 26, 2023 through November 15th, 2023, where the CAISO BA was limiting dynamic WIM transfers into the CAISO balancing area in the hour-ahead market and in the 15-minute market, but it was not limiting transfers in the 5-minute market. They were doing this for reliability reasons. DMM, pointed out over this last year or so in reports and board memos, that this was creating a systematic difference between the 15-minute market and the 5-minute market. and recommend that the ISO try to better specify when it may use this limitation. And again, the limitation was for 5 peak hours each day from July 26th to November 15th. And then we also recommend that ISO consider alternatives to this approach. And the ISO has acted. They've better explained when they may implement these limitations going forward. In Q1 2024, the ISO did not have a single hour where they limited WIM transfers into the CAISO area. And last time we checked, it was through about mid-September 2024. The ISO operators had not implemented this limitation during any hours. So that's a positive development. We do think that there are still the reliability need that gave rise to to implementing these transfers in really tight conditions where CAISO BA may need to not schedule all hourhead market sub-scheduled exports during tight conditions. We think that in those conditions there is ISO having implemented this, it did reveal and help us understand that there may be some issues in the ISO design that could potentially be enhanced going forward, because there still might be a need for the ISO to limit these transfers during really tight conditions going forward. And so it's been good to see that the ISO did not need to implement these limitations so far in 2024. But we do think it will be worthwhile to continue to explore why they had to do this, and if there are enhancements that could be done to the market design to try to eliminate this need altogether. But yeah, it looks they have obviously severely limited the extent to which they're going to use this. Let's see, just a couple more slides here on a couple other issues. So DMM, in working with a WIM entity, was asking us about confusion over the flexible ramping product settlement. Asked us to kind of talk through what they're seeing in their flexible ramping product settlement. And in doing that, DMM identified there has been an error in how the ISO has settled the flexible ramping product forecasted movement from February 1st, 2023. And I believe it's still ongoing. Last time we checked, I know the ISO has told us that they are going to fix the error in the settlement, and they're going to resettle these errors going backwards. The error was so the flexible ramping product, it has kind of two components. It has a forecasted movement component and an uncertainty component. It is important for the design that both the forecasted movement of resources in the advisory interval and the uncertainty portion of the flexible ramping product requirement, that those both settle on the same price. But the ISO was settling since February 1st, 2023. The ISO is settling the forecasted movement portion of FRP on the wrong interval. So they are going to fix that going forward and going backwards. This graph just shows the blue bars show DMM's estimate of the forecasted movement settlement. That's currently the current forecasted the current settlement. The red bar shows what DMM estimates to be the FRP forecasted movement settlement after the corrections put in place. So if the red bar is below the blue bar for a balancing area, it means that area will have either increased charges or reduced payments to the resources for forecasted FRP movement. We do estimate that the overall reductions in FRP payments to generators or increased charges to generators will be about $5.3 million netted across all balancing areas, and that could change again because this is only through March 31st, 2024. So it could go up or down until the ISO fixes it. And finally, let's see, this might be a little dense to get into in the last couple of minutes, but so that DMM pointed out that there's an issue with the flexible ramping product uncertainty requirement. So the FRP uncertainty requirement uses the Mosaic quantile regression, right? It's a method to take historical data to try to then take historical data to then create regression parameters to create regression parameters to estimate what the net load uncertainty requirement should be for balancing areas. But the that's easy to do, or not easy to do, but it's for balancing areas that fail the resource efficiency evaluation test. Creating those regression parameters can be done ahead of time, right before you get up to the hour. But the flex ramping uncertainty requirement for the group of areas that pass the resource efficiency evaluation test, those areas all split, right? They all share one flexible ramping product uncertainty requirement. So in order to do the regression to try to estimate what that uncertainty requirement should be, you first have to wait until you know which areas passed the resource efficiency evaluation, and therefore which areas are in the pass group. And so we've been noting to the ISO for a while now that due to the difference in timing of the runs of resource efficiency evaluation, which is which first needs to be done in order to determine the pass group and then calculate the regressions, right, the regression parameters, that there can be a difference then between the BAs that are used to determine what the regression parameters are versus the BAs which are actually in the pass group, and therefore whose net load forecasts get multiplied by those regression parameters in order to actually calculate the final uncertainty requirement for that pass group. And without time to get into the details here, that issue has that inconsistency between the BAs, between the BA whose information is used to determine the regression parameters and the BAs who are actually then information is multiplied by those regression parameters, that has resulted in errors in errors in what the uncertainty requirement is for the flex ramping product for those areas in the pass group. And so we've done some analysis to estimate what the size of those errors are. And we look at this graph, we see that it was been in about 18% of 15-minute market intervals. There's been an inconsistency in the balancing areas in the pass groups that's used to determine the regression parameters versus the balancing areas. This information is then multiplied by those parameters. And in about 8% of intervals, the error in the flex ramping product uncertainty requirement for the pass group has been more than 50 megawatts. I don't want to get into this. I did want to talk about this now because the ISO has been working on this since we've been talking about it. And so we do think, and when we get into the Q3 report, there has been improvements in this. And that is it for me. I got right at 11. Sorry, I went a little fast there at the end. If you have any more questions, please see our website. Or you could feel free to email me or the DMM at kaiso.com if you have any questions. Thank you all for being here today. I don't know if there's any time for questions, or we should end it given that we're right at 11.
That's up to you. Do you want to give that opportunity?
Yeah. Let's maybe give 1 minute, 1 or 2 minutes for people who might have a question, might want to stay a little extra.
Okay. All right. And to give you just that final reminder, you can feel free to open your participants panel by clicking the person icon in the lower right-hand corner of WebEx. And then once you have that open, in the bottom right-hand corner of that panel, you'll see the raise hand icon. Okay, we don't appear to be receiving any questions at this time.
Well, all right then. We will end it on time then. Thank you very much, everybody. I look forward to speaking to you again when we get the Q2 report out, hopefully in the near future. Thanks.
That concludes our conference. Thank you for using Inteller. You may now disconnect.